Cyclopes. Yes, I'm just discovering now that the plural for Cyclops, which I always thought was Cyclopes, is Cyclopes. That's going to be fun to say a bunch. Welcome back to Hungry for Knowledge. I'm Yuki, and we're doing something a little bit different this month, but we'll get to that later. Many of us know of Cyclopes as these giant lumbering monsters that eat people and just kind of invoke the aura of being evil. But what if I told you there was a little bit more to them? The first times that they appeared were in Greek mythos around 700 BC, with the most famous story being the Odyssey, the stories of Odysseus and his travels from Troy back to Ithaca. And where the Cyclopes come into play is in Book 9, the story where Odysseus fought Polyphemus. Now, take in mind that books 9 to book 12 are all stories that Odysseus told to a king and queen to try and make him look cool, essentially, so that he could get passage back to Ithaca, since these were seafaring folks, so they would be the best people to ask. He told them a story of as he was traveling, trying to travel home, I should say, where he landed on an island that he now refers to as the Isle of the Cyclopes. And as you can imagine, there's probably something that he ran into on that island, right? So he and his men set off onto this island for some reason with wine. I guess they were planning on getting turned or something. Well, we'll get to that later, though. And they found a cave that was full of food. So they just decided, oh, we're hungry. Let's just chow on down. And his soldiers really wanted to take all that food and just take off. But Odysseus believed that he could invoke the right of hospitality, being that he would wait for the owner to come and request that they get to take it. Now, I don't think that turned out very well for him, because as he was waiting, a giant creature returned home. This giant creature being a giant one-eyed creature called a Cyclope. And the meaning is very point blank. It just means round eye. This giant man only had one eye, as we've known, and he was herding sheep because he was just living life like any other guy, just trying to chill. And so Odysseus decided, hey, I'm still going to ask, even though he's this giant lumbering beast that is also known as the son of Poseidon, and could probably snap him like a twig, honestly. And unfortunately for him, that's pretty much exactly what happened, as Polyphemus was described to have just taken two of his soldiers and just chowing down on him. After he had entered, though, he blocked the door with a giant boulder, so Odysseus and his men couldn't really escape, or so they thought. And so they waited. And as Polyphemus left the next day, they found a club in his cave, and they decided to sharpen it to the point like a stake. And when he returned, Odysseus thought he'd be the nice guy and give him the wine that they had had. Now, supposedly, this wine was not diluted at all, so it was extremely, extremely powerful. And as Polyphemus drank it, he asked for Odysseus's name. And Odysseus, being the snarky guy that he is, he said, "My name is Nobody." And with that, the Cyclops kind of got drunk off his ass and passed out, for lack of a better word. And as he was passed out and sleeping, Odysseus and his men decided, oh, we're going to take this stake. This guy can only see one way. He's only got one eye. So let's jam it into his eye. And as you can imagine, Polyphemus was in a little bit of pain. So he screamed in pain, and the other Cyclopes around heard, and they came to the cave and they said, essentially, hey, what's going on? And verbatim, what he said is, nobody. Nobody's killing me now by fraud and not by force. That really confused the other guys because they're like, oh, I guess he's just. Who knows? He might be sleepwalking and just shouting something. So, in the morning, now that Polyphemus was blind, he opened up the cave again because he had to let his sheep graze. Um, and Odysseus and his men were described as hanging onto the bottom of the sheep and riding them out and then quickly escaping to their ship. Now, Odysseus has described as kind of a snarky asshole. So he shouted out his name to Polyphemus as the one who defeated him. And Polyphemus got pretty pissed off, as you can imagine, and tried to use some echolocation powers and chuck some boulders that narrowly missed Odysseus's ship and could have probably made the story end a whole lot faster, but I feel like this is to the same idea as like cool guys walk away from explosions, cool guys drift away from giant rocks, I guess. And now that Polyphemus knew Odysseus's name, he prayed to his father Poseidon. I told you that was important. And Poseidon was pissed. He's like, you just jabbed my son in the eye. So Polyphemus prayed to Poseidon that he never made it home and that his family would be fatherless, basically. But Odysseus just described it as strong winds, strong seas to fight through, and that was his continuing trials as he was the hero of the story, as we all know. But that wasn't the only story from ancient Greece. The Cyclopes also appeared again in the poet Hesiod's story, Theogony, as three mighty blacksmiths who all shared only one eye. Now, they were said to have three eye sockets, but only one eye to spare between the three of them, which was quite odd. I feel like it was kind of to keep them from rebelling against anyone. These three guys were born of the primordial sky god Uranus, or Uranus, whichever you prefer, and the primordial earth goddess Gaia, and were known now as Brontes, Steripes, and Argis. And they were the ones that were known to create pretty much every artifact and piece of armor that was used by the gods of Olympus and the Titans at the time. But these guys were also known to have forged the thunderbolt that Zeus wielded to overthrow the Titans. So that's kind of where their names come into play because they were all references to the thunder, basically. The last reference that we'll see was not very detailed. It was just referred to as the wall builders, who were the ones who are known to have created the mighty walls of Mycenae, Tiryns, and Argos. Now, mind you, I can't pronounce shit, so I could have pronounced all of this wrong. So feel free to call me out. Now, there isn't really anything beyond that, unfortunately, just that they were built. It's kind of the same idea as like how the pyramids were built, but we don't really know how they were able to do it without the technology at the time. So we don't really know much about them other than they were described as looking the same as Cyclopes were referred to before, and they were strong enough to build these mighty walls. Now, there are other things coming out nowadays where, as with a lot of mythology, people want to disprove it. And there's some pretty strong theories floating around that people believe that these people might have just seen giant skulls from mammoths at the time. And when you look at an elephant skull or a mammoth skull, you see a giant indentation, which they refer to as where the trunk comes from. There's probably an actual verbiage, I can throw it up on screen, but what have you. So these really looked like they just had a giant eye socket. So what if Odysseus just saw that and said, "Hey, I saw Cyclops. Yeah, they're out there. Don't try and challenge me though, but they're out there." Now, you might have seen some of these brothers or Polyphemus himself in a lot of media out there. Um, because, as we said, they were described as monsters in 700 BC, and they've continued to be shown as such. Some of the major references you might see out there now are Polyphemus in what was oddly a multiplayer version of God of War. Of course, Percy Jackson, as we all know. That was a little bit of my obsession at the time. I was a dweeb. Um, and Polyphemus appeared in Percy Jackson, The Sea of Monsters, as they were searching for the Golden Fleece. The three brothers also appeared again in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which obviously was reference to Greek and Roman myth. Um, and Argus also appeared in what we saw in Disney's version of Hercules. They never showed the other two brothers, and they just referred to him as a Titan, but he was there, I guess. Some other instances that you might have seen them appear that we always kind of just assumed with a Cyclopes. Oh, gosh, can't even pronounce it now. In some things like anime, like Monster Musume. But the difference is they were known as mono eyes, which, as we did a little bit more research, might actually be reference to a one-eyed yokai. Um, the main reference being the Hitotsume Nyoto. Again, shout at me if I'm pronouncing it wrong. But those are really the major references we've seen. We can't really know too much about Cyclopes unless we actually talk to them. So you're going to have to stay tuned for what I like to call Hungry for Knowledge Monster Month.